like everybody knows me already though.
You don't. I don't.
Well, I've been talking at you all day.
Yeah.
I hope lunch was good. So they actually, Seductio actually makes all the food. We give them the recipe. So maybe I should have asked, did it taste like home food? Maybe before I told you that.
It was pretty close.
Yeah, it was pretty close. Did you have to laugh? Yeah, was it pretty close?
Yes, I did.
I tried it. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah,
We give them the recipe and then they make it and then we taste test it a couple of times.
You know, when I went
yeah,
back
they did a
where
really
we
good
took all
job.
the things, they released to them.
The
I
vegetables.
don't know, because they said, so it goes from the city, goes on in India, and then like there's 2 6 left, and then they took it.
Yeah, my university has Seductio.
Because you were there?
Yeah.
But I didn't know they could do that.
Yeah, I think that Seductio is pretty flexible. Like, well, I guess it depends on the staff because I go to St. Kate's and then we had Seductio too, but the staff, they weren't really flexible. But the team here, they're like so open and they're on your side. They go shopping with you, you show them how to buy the ingredients and they make it.
Oh,
So they were really nice, yeah. So I hope you all like the food.
It was good.
Yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah, it was close enough. Yeah, I thought it was close enough. Did you like the home
Better
sauce?
than the sandwich.
They made that.
That was good.
Yeah.
I like the sausage.
I kind of like that one better than the one at like Hometown or Home Village. Yeah, I thought it actually tasted like a little bit healthier. Maybe because of the way they steamed it and then they grilled it, you know?
Is it actually made in here or they come out?
They make it here in their kitchen.
Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't know they could make it.
Yeah, because I think Concordia has a policy that we can only provide food from Seductio. So that's like the contract that we sign. So every year when we organize the conference, we give them, the recipes. And I think because this is our 5th year, so they've had 4 years of making, the
I know. I always thought that they can cook in here, but they cannot make the sausage in here from scratch. So.
Yeah, I think they do make it.
Okay, so I think it's time for us to start. And here is Mysee. Mysee, she's a student graduate from St. Kate University with an Bachelor of Art in the Women's Study. Mysee had her research study that was, let's see, I think the glass. Yeah, Mysee research study legislative bilingual value was influenced by her personal experience as a second generation Hmong women. In this study, Mysee explored what it means to be bicultural. Mysee's interest in research first started when she worked as a research assistant for a project Hmong agriculture. Throughout her undergraduate, she continued to advance her academic and research experience as a Ronald McNair Scholar and non-linear scholar. Whose academic award include receiving the best paper in women's studies, award for her short memoir, Studies of a Hmong Girl, and the Kata Gala Hill Medal of Honor. In the spare time, Mysee enjoyed baking and watching other movies.
Thank you so much. Is it new or no?
No.
No? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So, thank you everybody for coming to this small intimate session. I encourage all of you to move up to the front if you'd like to. Maybe I'll allow 30 seconds if you want to make a seat change. If you're happy where you are, you can also stay there, but I tend to be like the type of person where I like everybody all cozied up. So I do have a script that I'm going to be reading from. So yeah, so feel free to move up if it helps you see. If you're comfortable where you are, you can totally stay there. I'm fine too. So I usually don't do like a formal script, but because I have so much information and I'm so passionate about this study, I'm gonna read from a script if that's okay with you. Okay. And then my hope is that we'll really get to dialogue today about this topic because I know that all of you have some experiences that you'd also like to share with each other and connect with each other. So before I go into my research, I just want to kind of preface this with my own personal story. So I'm a second generation Hmong American woman. I grew up in Colorado and I moved here with my mom when I was 11 years old. And for me, something that my mother has always said is, so for those of you who don't speak Hmong, that translates into English. Education is like a key that opens doors. So that's something that my mom said to me almost every single day. when I was in high school, and that was a value that I really lived by. And so I chose to pursue higher education when, many of my friends in middle school dropped out and got married, and had kids, and, there's 16 of us, and now only 8 of us, graduated from college. So that was kind of the time that I was growing up, and I just find it ironic that as I pursue higher education and follow what my mother has told me, I feel like I'm dragged farther and farther away from her. I feel like I'm becoming someone else, and sometimes I feel like I'm trapped in these two worlds where, I have to ask myself, oh, am I Hmong, or am I American, or am I Hmong, or am I American, and I go back between these two worlds a lot. And so my research is really a journey, for me, and helping me to understand my own identity and my own experiences. And I have so much to share with you about that, but I'll kind of just stop for now because I can go on and on about that. So I'm going to go into the research piece, and I'll try to come back and move it back to the story. So thank you for everyone who just came in. Feel free to make yourself cozy. I'm going to move into the project. So
There are more seats in the center.
yeah, there's more seats there, so feel free to come here. As now mentioned, I'm a Ronald E. McNair Scholar. So for those of you who are currently in college, I encourage you to get involved in that program if you have it at your institution. It's a program that encourages first generation, low-income students of color to go into graduate school, whether it be master's level or PhD level, okay? So it's very competitive to get in. Usually the cohort size is about 12 to 15, depending on the school that you go to. But they provide very intensive training from like how to research graduate schools and apply to graduate school to how to do research. And so for me, I was really fortunate that I made the cut and I got into this program, and the program I got into was located at the University of St. Thomas, where I was mentored by a faculty in sociology. And, I was just really thinking that she would hold my hand and, help me through it, and she was like, nope, it's your project, it's your option to learn and do research on your own, So she said, go with what you're passionate about and go with what you're interested in. And this was my passion, and she said, why not do a whole project on this? So she was very supportive, and I got to do everything from scratch. So I stand before you today because I have the honor of being here, but I want you to know that I'm no expert, okay? I have none of the answers. I only have a lot of questions. So I encourage you to share your experiences with me today so that we can dialogue and really learn about this process, okay? So do I have your buy-in? Are you okay with contributing? Okay, I hope so. All right, so this is just a brief agenda of what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to be brief in my presentation so that we have room for discussion and questions, which I've already brainstormed and brought up, so if you don't dialogue in line, I'll ask you, okay? So just letting you know. I'll go into my research, my literature review, what I focus on in my research. I would love to share with you some of the stories of my participants, conclude with some findings, and then move into Q&A and then the discussion. So if you need to use the restroom, feel free to excuse yourself. That's totally okay by me. So first I just want to draw your attention to my research purpose and question. So my purpose in doing this research was to really understand and explore the identities of Hmong American women and what is their lived experiences. When I first started as a scholar, a McNair scholar, I read a lot of books on assimilation and people who are second-generation Americans, and there was a lot of quantitative studies. And I'm not really good at math. I don't know if all of you, love math. Or so for those of you who are good at math and love quantitative stuff, you go. But I was not that type of person, so I was really feeling like my answers weren't getting answered. And so I came up with recent questions that I really am interested in knowing about. So one of my questions was, how do Hmong American women come to understand their identities? And then another question was, how does higher education influence their identity construction, that process of discovering who they are? And then when I came back to St. Kate's, I had the opportunity to expand my research. So I did some work, and then I took it back to St. Kate's, and I had the opportunity to grow my research. I added more questions to my research study, and interviewed the same women, with different questions, and then analyzed it over. And those two new questions was, how do they overcome bicultural conflict, and how do they exhibit agency in the construction of their identities? So those were my research purpose and questions. Before I go into my research, I think that it would be good to give you some brief, background information to kind of set the context for my findings. So I'm hoping that this section, although full of information and may overload you, is going to help you better understand where my findings are coming from. So for those of you who don't know what I mean by second generation, I mean that you are the children of parents who are immigrants, and you either came here when you were younger than 5, or you were born here to parents who were immigrants. Is that good? So that's how I'm using the term second generation. And then for those of you who don't know, Hmong people are an ethnic group that originated in Southeast Asia. I feel like most of you know that because you came to this conference. So I'm not going to go too deeply into Hmong history, but rather kind of focus upon what I found in my research around Hmong women and education. So there's a scholar named Donnelly, and she focused a lot of her work in the 1990s when she started researching, how are Hmong women and their lives changing. And one of the things she found is that the economic structure of the United States is impacting the gender roles within the Hmong culture. And one specific example in her book is early marriage and education. And so back in Laos and Thailand, it used to be that women would just work in the domestic household, and they would get married at an early age, and that was the norm, and that was okay. But once they came over here, 2 incomes were required, in order for a family to be economically sufficient. And so Hmong women started going out of the house, to find work, and so that changed some of the gender dynamics, within the household. And then secondly, not only do you have to find a job, but you have to go to college. And so they found in this other study that I looked at that a lot of Hmong parents have changed their attitudes around early marriage because they realized that, education is good for a daughter. She needs it in order to be economically sufficient and economically independent. So a lot of those attitudes are shifting and changing like today. So that's something interesting that I found. Other studies that I looked at also cited higher status and the need for self-growth and improvement as to reasons why Hmong American women are pursuing education today. And I also found in my studies that there was a disparity between Hmong women going to college and Hmong men going to college, and I don't know the answer why. Perhaps that's a good discussion question, but that's not what my study is about, so I just wanted to bring it up that that's something interesting that I found that we could probably discuss. And then the next thing to understand is assimilation. So assimilation is basically this key idea of, how do people who come to a new country adapt and, change their ways and, integrate into the society of that new country. So there's this idea called classical assimilation theory, which is founded by Milton Gordon. He's kind of like the forefather, like the founder of assimilation theory. And he's making this argument that assimilation is a straight line process. So you come here as an immigrant, you give up some of your cultural values and you take on, the ones that you're living in, and then you slowly integrate into that community. However, there are some people out there who don't agree with him. So they are called segment assimilation theorists, and I kind of actually agree with them. So their idea is that, assimilation isn't a straight line. It's, envision a tree branch, right? So there's one, you start off the same, but then you kind of go into different directions. And the reason why that happens is because some people who come here, they already come here with formal education, they already come here with economic resources. So when they get here, their parents are at already higher socioeconomic levels, and therefore they can integrate, the children of those immigrants can integrate very easily into a higher class, which is termed upward mobility. And then there are some people, like the Hmong, who come to the United States with no resources because they are fleeing a war-torn country. They've never been formally educated because they've always been, agrarian. And they come here with, no resources. They have to go on their own. And so because of all these different factors, the children who are there, the children of these immigrant parents, they, depending on how well they do in school and how well they, adapt, they might assimilate downward, which is, they become poorer than their parents, or they might integrate into the middle class or into a higher class. So these are just some interesting ideas that I found, and I think that I'm definitely, I like that argument of segment assimilation theorists very much. And then, within my research on assimilation, I found that bicultural conflict is a big key idea. So bicultural conflict, briefly, is this push and pull between two worlds. And one example I have is like Vietnamese youth, right? So they're Vietnamese American. They come to this country and they live with Vietnamese parents who are used to Vietnamese ways. But at the same time, they have to grow and come of age in this American society that is about pop culture, hip hop, and all these things. And their parents may say, no, you're not dyeing your hair. No, you're not cutting, your hair like that. You're not going to wear those clothes. You're not going to rap, But then they're saying, no, this is cool. I'm trying to be cool, So there's this push and pull, and that is called bicultural conflict. Am I going too fast for anyone? Okay, I tend to talk fast. So, what's also interesting is what other scholars are saying about this idea of, bicultural conflict. Lisa Lowe is an Asian American scholar, and I love Lisa Lowe, so you should definitely take down her name. She wrote a book called Immigrant Acts, and she argues that because we focus so much on bicultural conflict, we ignore, the differences and the beauty of being different. And all these Asian American cultures, they're so different from each other, yet we keep talking about one narrative, the bicultural conflict. And this overshadows all the differences and all the things that happen within our different cultures. It becomes one dominant story where we're always talking about how we don't fit in, in the American society, or how we don't fit in within our own. And she doesn't believe that that is the right way to go. And so she argues that there's multiplicity, right? So that each of us own our own different experiences. You and I may be Hmong, but your experience as a Hmong woman is very different from my own. We may share some things, but how you experience these particular things is very different. So that's a new concept. And when I first learned it, it took me a while to really understand it. So I'm going to give you an example. Take, for example, Japanese Americans. Those who came here during World War II have a different immigrant experience than those who came after 1945, right? So do you know what happened during World War II? Can somebody tell me? It's a situation here?
In the Japanese internment?
Yes. So yes, you're correct. So the Japanese internment camps, right? So Japanese Americans who came to the U.S. during that time experienced a lot of, negative feedback about their identities, right? So today, if a Japanese person were to immigrate, they have a completely new experience. So that's just one example that I hope I can provide you to help you grasp this concept of multiplicity. So this idea about different identities and different experiences kind of goes into this other idea of intersectional identities. And some of you may have already heard this in your humanities classes or your sociology classes, but this is something I love and I love to study. So intersectional identities is this idea that we have many identities. I may appear before you as, Asian. I may appear before you as, a woman, but I also have many other identities within me. So I'm Catholic, that's my religion. Something that may not be obvious is my sexual orientation, So I have many identities within me that's not, apparent. But we possess all these different intersectional identities. So why, when we ask people about who are you? Why do they only give us a simple answer about I'm Hmong, or I'm a woman, or I'm this? Because there are other superstructures, right? Like racism, sexism, ageism, heterosexism, all these things that operate, that impacts how we choose to think about our identity. So because all these superstructures interlock and they operate in a big system of oppression, we feel compelled to only choose one or two identities, okay? And so I have a quote from Trint Min Ah. She's a post-colonial feminist scholar. She writes that many women of color feel obliged to choose between ethnicity and womanhood, but how can they? You never are or have, one without the other. So this raises that question of why do we feel that way? And so this kind of leads me to this question of agency, right? So how do Hmong American women exhibit agency in their identities? And there's a lot of these forces, with their parents saying, you have to be Hmong this way, and then, American society, you have to be American this way. How do they have the power within them to choose who they are and what they do? That's what agency is about, and I'm really passionate about agency. Okay, so agency is this idea that an individual has the capacity to choose who they are. They have the capacity to resist power structures. Okay, and sometimes when I first started learning about this idea of agency, I thought about it as it has to be big. Somebody has to be very powerful, has to be the president, has to have political power. But no, I read a book by Salva Mahmood, and her definition changed my mind about agency. So I'm just going to read a quote here from her book. She said, we should keep the meaning of agency open and allow it to emerge from within semantics and institutional networks. Delete it from progressive politics. So essentially what she's saying is, let's not look at agency as this, big concept, but let's look at it as, something ordinary, something everyday. What is something little that you do every day that proves you have some power, to resist dominating structures, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So I just want to remind you my research purpose and question again before I move on into the narratives. Okay, and so I'm going to share a little bit about my methodology. So I did a qualitative, research project because as I was mentioning, I wasn't a big fan of, reading the data. So qualitative just means that I chose to analyze stories and, talk to people. And I had the, opportunity of interviewing 5 Hmong American women who are from St. Paul, Minnesota. All of them were second generation. They graduated from college. All of them are married, and 2 of them have a bachelor's, 2 of them have a master's, and 1 has a PhD. So those are the different educational levels. And after I interviewed them, I took their stories and I analyzed, I transcribed each of them, and then I broke them up into different themes. And I just can't begin to tell you all the different things that I learned. But I'm just going to be sharing two major themes that popped up in my research for you today. So those themes are difference. A lot of the women that I interviewed spoke about difference in terms of their experiences with race, class, gender, ethnicity, and cultural differences. And then they also, talked a lot about agency. So this wasn't something that I proposed that they had to talk about it. It was in analyzing their stories that I realized agency is a big theme here. And so they showed agency in their interviews through consciousness, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. Reclaiming or redefining their identities, how they created, a space for themselves, and also about how they talked about their community and their passion to lift their community up. So I have a lot of different women's stories here today for you. However, I don't have a lot of time to share all of them with you. So they're there in my slide. If we have time, I can go back. But I'm just probably going to share 2 of the 5 stories for you today. So I first just want to introduce you to Lee. She's one of my participants, and she is a proud mother of 2 girls. She's a local community activist. She's very passionate about racial equity. She sits on, the board of a charter school. And, surprisingly, when she started telling me her story, she talked about how she hated being Hmong. And so I'm just going to read here a quote from her. You can feel free to listen to me, or you can read along on the screen as I read to you. So Lee said, I needed to turn away from being Hmong, and I struggled with that. It was a huge conflict. I would fantasize about being white. I always thought if I was a white girl, I would have friends over for a sleepover, or I would be able to go for a sleepover. I thought if I were a white girl, I would be able to have my own car, my own room. I would know what the word vacation means. I would go vacation with my family. I would be able to go shopping whenever I felt like buying something. I also thought I would be able to go to school, get my master's, my PhD. I would be able to do all of that. And my family would live in a house with 2 cars, a dog, and a white picket fence. That was the end goal, to be like that. Because I thought that was what was better. Because I saw that was what was better. I believed being white was being better. So as you can tell from her interview, she's talking about difference here, and she's alluding to race and class differences. What I think is interesting is that she colludes race with class. So here, from her interview, I can draw that, somehow, to her, being white means being rich, and being Hmong means being poor. And agency also shows up in her story when she starts to talk about how she chose to raise her daughter. So at first she had a negative experience about being Hmong because she was getting all these signals about what it meant. It meant being poor, it meant being, like this. But then, when she had her child, it started changing for her. And she said that while in college, I had a child out of wedlock. Having my daughter taught me a lot. I would say that it made me really look at myself. It taught me to appreciate Hmong culture so much more than I ever thought. It took me back to my original roots. It forces me to look at my own internalized racism and deal with the hurt and start healing. Now I have 2 children who are biracial, and I feel it is up to me to teach them about being Hmong, or teach them about the Hmong culture. I don't need to teach them about being white because that's all around them. It is what's dominant. I sent them to a Hmong charter school where they learn to read and write Hmong. I'm so proud of them. They speak better Hmong than me. So this, for me, attests to how she exhibits agency, because for her, raising her daughter is her way of reclaiming her identity, right? And defining for herself, what do I value about being Hmong and what is powerful about this experience. And she is reclaiming her identity through the way that she teaches, her girls to be proud of who they are, where she had a different experience, but she was growing up not feeling proud, to be Hmong. And also, I want to draw attention to the fact that she used past tense when she was talking about how, she hated being Hmong. She said, I would, I thought, I'd be able to, I believed. And so this use of language demonstrates her consciousness, and how racism, affects her identity. And this is something very small that some analyzers could miss, but I picked up on it after 12 times of reviewing her script, I thought that's so powerful. It's so small, but it demonstrates to you that today she's conscious. Her mind, is no longer in that phase where she's internalizing the racism. She has the power to say, I've overcome this. And I thought that was a very powerful sign of agency. So I wanted to draw your attention to that. This is Belle's story, which I don't have time for, but I would love to introduce you to Blia. So the next woman I'm talking about, she's also a very powerful figure within the Hmong community. She's very passionate about ministry and about helping couples get along. And so when she grew up, she said that she felt she was torn between two worlds. And the word that she uses is bifurcated. So she said that there was a very distinct Hmong world that I interacted in. And there was also a very distinct American world that I interacted in. My identity as a young child growing up is much more defined by my Hmongness than the Americanness. But I grew up actually feeling like I didn't belong in either world. That there should be this third world where people can talk about, hey, this is my value and it's from this culture. And I'm sort of a conglomeration of these things. And it would be okay and safe to be different. So this is just her noticing the different spaces that she was in. That one was very Hmong and one was very cultural. So I thought that was very interesting compared to the first participant that I shared with you, where her experience of differences kind of was, about race. And for her, it was about noticing different cultural spaces. So how agency shows up in Blia's story is in how she constructs this third world. You just saw, how she noticed that she doesn't belong in either space and that she wanted a third world. And so for her, how she has created this third world is by bonding common values. So I'll read her quote for you because I think it speaks more than me explaining it to you. So she says, take for example the value of hospitality. In the Hmong culture, there is a rule about hospitality. If you have a guest who comes into your house, you're not supposed to go and hide in your room. You have to give them water and welcome them. As a Christian, my faith says it is important to be loving, to treat others with kindness. So out of my Christian faith, I follow the value of hospitality because it is my faith and that I should love and treat others with kindness. And that inspires me to be hospitable towards others. So this is a really good example of how she's making the best of both worlds, right? She's taking what she loves about the Hmong culture and what she loves, about being, Christian, and she's merging them together. She's constructing that third world that can be in between these two worlds that she keeps feeling, are tipping over. And not only does she combine what she likes, but she critiques what she doesn't like on both ends. So I'll read this as an example. She says, one thing I see in the Hmong community is that women are scared to speak and lead in public. I see this in the Hmong church that I attend. It was explicit in the sense that they teach women to remain quiet in meetings. I always try to challenge the norm and speak up. When we're at meetings and the women are quiet, I'll speak up and give my opinion. I do this in both worlds, both Hmong and American. At work, you hardly see Asian people in decision-making positions. It's usually assumed that if you're Asian, you're quiet. So I speak up as well and challenge that norm. So this really just attests to how she's really, pulling and mulling this third world that she belongs to. And she's challenging norms on both ends. So I'm going to go into the concluding thoughts. There's still so much more to share, but I just want to share with you some key points, from my findings and what I really walked away with. So for me, I think the biggest lesson to learn here is that identity is very complex, and that although some of us may feel that we are pulled towards either a Hmong or American identity, it's really not about the push and pull between the two. It's really about being both, right? So if you think of a hyphen, not like, a slash, but a hyphen, being Hmong and American, not Hmong or American, okay? Lisa Lowe and Vic No, two of the scholars that I really admire, urge us to complicate the discourse on identity and take away that binary opposition in identity construction. Okay, so they're saying that a binary construction of difference uses a logic that prioritizes the first term and subordinates the second, right? So what they're saying is that we have to get away from thinking Hmong or American, Hmong or American. Let's take that all apart, and let's look at the gray area, is what they're saying. Let's complicate it, And then I think for me, another thing to gain from this is that each of the women, I interviewed only 5 women, and although we are all Hmong American women, each of them had a different story to tell, and each of them had a very different journey and experienced a different process in, reconciling what they valued in their cultures. And they could, even though some of them, are much older, maybe 30 or 35, they're still continuously doing it today. So that's the powerful lesson that I walked away, because before I thought, oh, there's only one way to be Hmong American, one way, and I have to comply to both being Hmong and, to what the American culture wants me to be. But these women demonstrate in their stories that the right way is to write your own story, to make up your own way. I just also want to offer some concluding thoughts about the impact of higher education on Hmong American women. And so it is apparent that education is, a crucial factor in how, these women have assimilated into society, and many of them hold powerful positions and are, economically sufficient. So their education has played a major role in helping them adapt and integrate to society, but it does not completely assimilate them. Because as my participants, if I had more time, I would share with you. Higher education has also provided this, space for them to think critically about their ideas, their identities. It's provided them a space to question what it means to be a Hmong woman, and it has given them concepts to explore identities. It's given them the language to articulate how they feel, and it's also, been a tool for them to empower themselves and their community and agency. And so lastly, something that I really walked away with is that, all these women, despite their journeys and despite what they shared about, how they felt, if the home culture was oppressing them or not, all of them at the end of the interview said, I still love my community and I still want to make a difference. I'm going to use this knowledge that I've gained, from college, and I'm going to go make a difference in my community. And Ia, one of the participants in my, study, she is making a difference as an educator, and she spoke specifically how she wants to work with Hmong kids and mentor them. Pa mentors Hmong college students. She creates like a, her own nonprofit. She mentors college students who are Hmong, who are currently, in high school. She mentors them into college. B is involved in Hmong charter school. Bao works in the area of public policy for the Hmong community, and Blia advocates for gender equality and healthy marital relationships in the Hmong community. So all these Hmong women, that was for me like the big takeaway, is because I felt like, when I first started my college journey, I had this idea that, being an empowered Hmong woman meant that I had to leave my community. It meant I had to give up the family functions, no more cooking, no more cleaning, no more family time, like I'm just going to focus on me and my career, and at the end I really learned that I don't have to give that up. I can still be with this community and still, work with them and give back, and I think that it kind of goes back to the idea of agency, where a lot of, white feminists, they think about agency as this idea of like by myself, empowerment for myself, but for Hmong women, they have this collective vision of agency, and I'm still really trying to explore that in my research. I haven't done a lot of interviews yet, so I'm still working on it. But that's a very powerful lesson that I'd like you to walk away with. So I have a quote here to kind of conclude. Alice Walker, one of my favorite writers, writes that womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. So I'll let you ponder that. I won't explain the meaning of that. So lastly, I'd just like to acknowledge two of the universities who has really been foundational in, helping me to become a scholar and being in front of you today, St. Catherine University and University of St. Thomas. These are just some examples of my references. I do have my paper online, so if you want to read the whole 50+ page, feel free to email me and I can send it to you as well. This is my email. Are there any questions? Maybe, how are we doing on time? 2:33. And we're done at 3?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I ran through that pretty well. Good. Okay, so I would love to hear questions from all of you, so maybe 10 minutes about that, and then I have discussion questions too. So now I'll hand the baton over to all of you and let you decide what you'd like to do. So are you okay with a Q&A, and then we'll go into a group dialogue where I have questions, or do you want just to proceed into group dialogue? I'm open to anything. Q&A maybe?
Should we try group dialogue?
Would you like to do group dialogues? I can,
Just to make sure there's time for
so
that.
these are my discussion questions. How have you experienced your identities? If you do identify as second-generation Hmong American, how do you relate to the experiences of the women in my study? And specifically, I have like specific little questions, did you ever feel like you were racialized and otherized? So that's what a lot of the Hmong women in my study talked about, was going through school and being labeled by other people, being racialized by their educators. I didn't have enough time to share the stories with you, so you don't get to see the part, but that's one of the questions I have for you. Do you ever feel pushed and pulled between these two worlds, And then lastly, how do you define empowerment or agency based on your social location? And by social location, I mean like, your specific, if you identify, as your gender, your socioeconomic class, your education status, your hetero, your sexual orientation. That's what social location means. It's like specifically how you identify with all these little things. And I can explain that more too. So these are the discussion questions. How about I do like Q&As first, and then we'll move into the group discussion question. Yeah? Okay, so does anyone have any burning questions? It doesn't have to relate to my study too. I was only given a short amount of time to really share with you, so I pulled out what was important. But
well, I think it's so fascinating. So that one of the kind of interlocking values was this sense of community. Now, do you think there's going to be, or this pushback? I mean, it would be terrible for me, right, as a relative outsider, to then have this essentialist idea. And then I'm going to go, okay, you Hmong people love to work in community, so let's start doing some community things.
Yeah.
And so I just think that while was amazing how community is so important.
Yes.
Okay, so that's such an important value. And I can say honestly that every time, I mean, all of my extracurricular work, extra work that I do here, all has to do with the Hmong community. And I love it because it's communal. We're doing it all together, right?
Yeah.
And so that is a value that I have as well.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a very, I really appreciate that you're really stepping out of the box and realizing your place and position, right, in this room and, you know, in your worldview. And I really respect that value, so thank you for saying that. And I think it's important for you to say that, right, like this idea of community and, you know, are you essentializing, right, as an outsider to say, oh, this is a value that all of you share. Because some of us may not be that interested, you know, and I kind of have a two-part. One, a lot of the women in my study that I interviewed, a sense of community, of, you know, having, you know, being Hmong, of, you know, being communal was something that all of them attested to, you know, because one of my research questions was, you know, how did you feel growing up being Hmong, you know, and having a strong sense of community. You know, they all talked about relatives, you know, and going to family functions. Many of the women that I talked to were, you know, animists, and so they often talked about that communal setting, you know, of like being together. So I would say that was, you know, a shared experience between only the 5 women that I interviewed, you know. And for myself, I feel like the reason why we have such a strong communal value is that because it's so integrated into our social structure. So all of us have a last name, right? Who are Hmong, we have a last name. And our family does not, you know, end where it's our mom, our dad, and our sister. Our family is our aunt, our uncle, our grandma, and not only just from our paternal side, but our maternal side. So, you know, my sense of family is like this, you know, versus where in America, your sense of family is your little nuclear family. But no, for me, when I say family, I mean like everyone. And I think that it's because of that clan structure that provides that social structure for our experiences, and that's why it's so communal. However, you know, as a Hmong American woman, you know, who's in the 21st century, where I'm second generation, and, you know, I sometimes find myself that this clan structure that we live in is becoming irrelevant to me. You know, I no longer want to abide by its rules sometimes, because for me it says, I eat the scraps and the men eat first. You know, so how do I deal with those moments? You know, at the same time, I love seeing all my cousins, and I love seeing all my aunts, but I hate that aspect of it, you know, that I have to serve. You know, and I also find that, you know, for me, the way I socialize with my friends is very different. You know, for my mom, her sister-in-law is also her best friend, okay? And for me, my sister-in-law is not going to be my best friend. You know, my best friend is, you know, she may be Hmong, but she's like someone I met at school. So the way that I'm socializing with my friends is very different from how my parents are socializing. So I would love to pose that question to all of you too, is how do you feel like our clan structure is going to change? You know, is the clan system going to change in the next, you know, 2 years, 3 years, and how will it change and how will it impact our structures, right? Because many of our cultural traditions, cultural belief is rooted in that system of clan, right? Of believing and supporting our clan. But like, you know, us young folks, we may not see those values, or we may not see that it's relevant anymore, you know? Because for us, oh, it's Saturday, I'm gonna go hang out with my friend, bye, you know? But for our family, for our parents, at least I know for my parents, Saturday, I'm gonna go to a funeral because, you know, an extended relative died. And that's how they socialize, and the way that I socialize is very different, you know? So I would say it's, you know, it's not one answer, it's a changing answer. You know, did I answer your question?
Absolutely, especially tying it back to the clans.
The clan structure. Yeah, it's so beautiful in a way, but I feel like it's so limiting too in so many ways. So I don't know. I think it's all, and everybody has a different clan experience. You know, mine is very different from everybody probably, but I'd love to hear all of you answer the question as well. Yeah.
Do you think that religion could kind of also change the structure of clans? Because because I started out as like animism, and then I had to convert to Christianity. So then all my guti and all my nalo and everything, it all changed to be my Christian family. Because once we converted, it wasn't as if like they hated us, but I don't know how to explain it.
Oh yeah, and that's your own experience, and I can't explain it for you either. But I think that it would be interesting to think about religion and how it impacts our clan structure and also our identities, right? And I have not done enough research to answer that question, so I'll just be honest that I don't have the answer. And for me, I've always grown up Catholic, and then my mom remarried my stepdad, who's animist. So for me, growing up, my clan was my church, and now it's like specific to last name, and we only see specific people. So I've gone through that conversion and that switch and how it's so different for me as well. But I really don't have the answer about, religion and how it impacts our identity. Does anyone have like, I don't know. I think that in some dialogues that I've had with people, I find that there are a lot of Christian Hmong people who are very modern, right? Like in the way that they treat their sons and daughters. I've definitely noticed that a lot of Christian families, and I only know this through my experience, so please take it with a grain of salt. I've not done a research experience, but I know that a lot of my friends who are Christians, their family, they don't privilege sons against daughters, where they give the son like, the okay, you do anything you want, and the daughters will serve you, versus a lot of, and it's not to say that people who are animists are more sexist. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say that the way that we have structured our gender roles is very rooted, right? Like the way that Behuning, the way that Behubli, all these rites and rituals that are very important require both Hmong men and Hmong women to participate in it, right? And sons and fathers and heads, the husband, they have specific roles that they do it, right? And then Hmong women, they have specific roles that they do, right? And so there tends to be this big separation of gender roles, this more concrete, distinct way of how we function as a Hmong woman, as a Hmong man, Like something for me, for example, is, I grew up in a church-going family, so there was never a separation of spaces. We, Hmong men and Hmong women in my family ate together at one table, okay? When my mom remarried, I knew that it was different because all the women could only go in the kitchen and all the men sat outside in the living room on the table. And we couldn't go and we had to serve the food, but we had to eat it last, So I'm not trying to say that one is better or the other. And I don't want you to walk away with me saying that, oh, people who are animists are sexist, because that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that the way that gender roles are structured is very inherent in our clan structure and our religion, right? And so how we live those out defines, what we understand to be a Hmong man or a Hmong woman. That's a long answer. Yeah, does anybody have any response? Yeah?
Okay, I'm a move from China.
Oh, that's probably completely different.
In China, the Hmong culture are influenced by Han Chinese. For example, what is a good wife in the moment in China? A good wife should be responsible for all of the housework. It should not feel to keep covering up with another man outside her home. Yes. So I don't know. I want to know that how the Hmong in America, what is the good housewife in the Hmong's ideals?
I think they're still very similar.
Yeah.
I think that they're so
shoot!
Right? I would love other people to, I would love other people to chime in. I think that young Hmong men today who are growing up maybe don't share the same values or the same ideas anymore. But I know a whole handful of people who do, and then I know a whole handful of people with different ideas.
Okay.
So it really depends. But other people, please.
Yes,
chime in.
my experience because I came to the country as a parent already. My own kids before I came to the country. And my husband's family, they're very traditional as well as my father's side of the family. However, during the time that we were still with our in-law, I still under the rules of everything had to do with the permission. Once we were out of the home, and my husband is very understandable too, so for his vision, being a good wife is you be able to put yourself out there in the community, bring in income, be able to become stable, be able to socialize with professional people and be in a professional environment. And that's how he sees what a good wife is. And what I see as a good husband, when you come home, you will be helping with the family. It doesn't mean that you have to change diaper or get a bottle ready for the baby anytime, but we have to balance our life because this life is all of us. So we have to balance our life, share the chores at home. It's not you're doing this, I'm doing that, but whatever is need to help, we just jump in and help. And we have 5 boys and a daughter. and our boys we taught them, you need to learn how to cook. Because you live in this country and you still very traditional family. But we raise our kids a totally different way. Your boys, however, you still need to learn how to cook. You still need to learn how to clean the house. Someday when you're married, we don't know whether you will be the one that bring more income or your wife will be the one. Maybe you'll be the one that end up and stay home with them, taking care of the kids. So that's why we have to train our kids in a totally different way from how we were trained by our parents.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that this is a relevant, like part where I was talking about multiplicity, right? In my research and how like this idea that we all may be Hmong or Hmong Shuo or Hmong Mika, but we all have these different experiences, and that answer is not, we can't have one answer that generalizes for all of it, because each of us have a different, a different experience and a different past. So that's kind of where multiplicity comes back again, Yeah, but thank you for asking that question. Yeah. Anybody else who have questions or comments that you wanted to chime in? Anything that like really resonated with you from like the research? So I would love to ask my question now, since I answered a couple of questions already. So, these are my 3 questions. So I would love to hear from 1 or 2 of you before we end our session, which, is it already over? No, we still have 10 minutes. We still have 10 minutes left. So does anyone want to chime in? I have these questions, or if you wanted to connect your thoughts to something else. It's totally free to, yeah?
I am second generation, and like I have felt like the push and pull between 2 worlds. Like even at this point, sometimes I question like, am I really Hmong? Because I'm very Christian, and like sometimes when I'm at school with other non-Christian Hmong people, they talk about all these traditional things they do that I don't do because my parents are like, no, that's for back animism and stuff like that, shaman stuff that we don't affiliate with, so we don't do those things. But they talk about it, and I'm like, that's how traditional, like our ancestors did it, and I don't do it. Am I still Hmong? And like, if I'm not Hmong, then am I American? But then I'm not really American either, because every single time somebody looks at me, they're like, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from Minneapolis. And they ask me again, no, but where are you from? And I'm like, I don't have a country, So I was like, I don't know what to answer if I'm not from America. I don't know where I'm from either. I can say where my parents are from, but I wasn't even born yet, so I'm not really from there either. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes
sense. Push and pull, I don't know which identity to choose. So every single time someone asks me, what's your ethnicity? I'm just like, I'm Hmong American. And they understand the American part, but I have to go and explain what the Hmong part is. And then some people will be like, oh, are you from Mongolia then? And I'm like, no, the Mongolians are Mongolians, they're not Mongolians. And I have to explain that part too.
Yeah. I just want to thank you so much for sharing that. I know that sometimes it's hard to share, and I feel like every word that came out of your mouth was exactly what I said when I was first year in college. Like I always sat in like the classroom and just vented about this and be like, this is what it feels like, And I think that what you're speaking to is how those superstructures that I was talking about operate, right? To make us forced to choose one or the other, You go to, you have Hmong friends who may be animist, and they say, oh, you're not Hmong enough because you're losing the culture. You're a Christian now, you're losing the culture. You're not preserving it, and then you don't feel like you're Hmong. And then you go outside and you're like, okay, fine, forget it. I'm going to be American, And you go outside and then all these Americans say, no, you're not American. You don't look like us. You don't eat like us. You don't talk like us, So what are you? Are you Mongolian? And then you get that pushback because of these superstructures that operate, And I feel like for me, I was in your spot before. I, came of age in Buffalo, in Buffalo, Minnesota. It's a very white town, very small, friendly white town, and it was really hard for me. And what saved my life was a low voice, and the book Bamboo Among the Oaks. I read those books every night, because, and I was a home teen editor too, and Pinya's was also a home teen editor with me. And so those 3 things helped me to really navigate, those identity crises where I was one or the other. And I think that my advice for anyone who feels like that is to be strong in who you are, and to understand that there's no one thing, Some people, they assume that being Hmong is one thing, that we have to share all these experiences. But remember, we all have to own our different experiences. And it's okay to be Hmong, but not share the same definition. I'm still creating what my definition of being a Hmong American woman is. Someday, when it's ready, I'll publish it out there, But I'm still working on it, So just be strong in who you are and figure out how do you have agency. It doesn't have to be big. Like, you don't have to come up with a big statement and say, okay, I'm Hmong American woman, and this is what I believe, 1, 2, 3, okay? It doesn't have to be big like that. It could be belittle, like when somebody says, where are you from? You choose a response that you say back that doesn't, necessarily have to entertain their questions, That's one small way that you can be powerful, and just find what works for you, find what makes you feel solid and, affirm who you are. Take classes in sociology and women's studies, I think for me, I wouldn't be up here before you talking about this if I didn't have these classes that really encouraged me to think about this, because I think that as Hmong, American, children, we are pressured by our families, right, to succeed financially because we come from a survival mindset, where we didn't have much, and so our parents are always like, be doctors, be lawyers, and so when we go to college, we always think, oh, business, doctor, we always think about these professions that will get us money, right? But we don't have time to take classes like women's studies or sociology that really helps us to talk about these things, And I was just sharing with you that I went to Buffalo High School, where there was not a lot of Hmong people. I was one of 2 Hmong girls, and they always thought we were best friends. Because, we were sit together, but really we didn't like each other. Because she really liked reading romance novels, and I was like, oh, I'm not reading that type of stuff with you. And so that experience was so hard for me because I would get on the bus and they would say, ching ching chong chong ling long, I would get on the bus, and the moment I got on the bus to the moment I sat down, they would say that all the way until I got home and I got off the bus. Every day I went through that, And it was so painful for me, And then when I got to St. Kate's, I took my first women's studies class, and that's where we really talked about racism. We talked about sexism, because I felt like I hated my culture too, because as a Hmong woman, I wasn't being treated right, But then I hated the American culture too, because they were so racist against me, and I had no room to be who I was. And in that class was really when I started exploring my identity and started learning that it was okay to talk about these things, And so for all of you, I would encourage you to take these classes to help you think through these things too, and to dialogue, because the more you talk about it is how you find answers. Anything else? I think we're almost out of time. No, we have time. Yeah?
Okay, this is a question for everybody. Okay, so, do you, ladies or men or just people who have pursued higher education, do you feel a little more rebellious against your own culture, trying to doubt your identity? Do you guys feel that sometimes, because you're in higher education, you are taking these courses like women's studies, ethnic racial studies, and all these types of different sociology classes that allow you to think deep about yourself? Do you feel that sometimes you doubt who you are and have trouble trying to find who you are, just because you are trying to pursue a higher education?
That's interesting because I never felt that I doubted myself, and in fact I feel more empowering and almost obliged to educate my family and my parents about what I've learned to help them educate my younger siblings that there is no such thing as gender roles, and that it's important to go to school and to learn about what it is to be a woman and how hard it is to fight for a place out there, especially being a businesswoman or politics, anything. And I think being able to educate your parents to give you that support is just as empowering as being understanding or understanding about yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and for me, I never got myself just because maybe just focus so much in my life, my family. Just want to get a good education, really nothing come in the family. At least stable, that's pretty much what I focus on. So, and I pretty much told out what other people was telling to say along, just focus on what I want to do. That's pretty much it.
I feel like I can answer that question in 2 ways. So one way is, where I kind of agree with them that, no, I feel empowered and I feel like it was a good experience for me, but if I think very deeply about it and I try to think about how complicated, it is, I would say, yes, there have been moments where I doubted myself, in both realms, One, because, I felt like other people were competing against me, right? Like when I sit in a room, being Hmong, knowing that I'm first generation, knowing that I'm low income, knowing that none of my parents could do my homework with me, or that, they couldn't call a professor and write a note for me. I felt like I wasn't on the same, level of playing field, as them, and it made me doubt myself, So there are moments like that, where I feel that. And then there are moments where I doubt myself because what I'm learning doesn't match with my internal experience, right? Like, sometimes I feel like I'm learning these ideas in sociology about gender roles and what it means to have equal gender roles, right? And then I look at at home and I'm like, we don't do that, so we're wrong. We're wrong, we're bad, you know. But you have to keep in mind, okay, that education also comes with, you know, it teaches you to, I'm just gonna say it, you know, it's a curriculum for white people. You know, it's made by white men. It's been there for centuries, you know, and depending on, you know, what discipline you're in, they may teach you ideas that come with subliminal messages, right, okay? And so you have to be careful about what you're learning and process it through your own, you know, experiences and say, okay, I don't agree with this, or, you know, I do agree with it. So you can't think that, oh, my family is bad all the time, or oh, they're wrong all the time, you know? You have to be really careful about what you're learning, you know? And for me, my personal experience with that is, you know, the first day I took my women's studies class, my teacher, my professor wanted us to write about our definition of being a Hmong, of being a woman, you know, and what is our point of entry to being a woman. And I wrote about an essay called The New Hmong Woman, right? And I had this idea that she was empowered, liberated, focused on her career, and I sent in expecting to get A+, you know, and I was like a freshman, you know, and I was so excited for this. And she turned it back with lots of red marks. And she said, no, your idea of liberation and empowerment, you know, is blind. Because you're using the definitions that white middle-class women use. I want you to go and research, you know, what it means to you and your community. First, you need to go to the library and check out some Hmong history books, is what she told me. And just read on your history, because you've never been taught history, your history as a Hmong person in elementary, in middle, or high school. So you need to go do that first, and then come back and write this paper. So this paper that I presented today is that paper that I turned into her at the end of my whole experience, you know. And I still have that paper that she marked with me. I don't have it with me today. You know, but it was a huge shocker for me because I thought, oh, here, you know, I'm so ready to start college. I have this new idea of what it means to be a Hmong woman. I'm going to ace this paper. And then she said, no, you're wrong. You know, you need to go back and do some reflecting. Because I think that she saw that, you know, there are some good things in the Hmong culture that's worthwhile to keep and to appreciate and to hold on to. You know, and she wanted me to learn that lesson the hard way by making me do a lot of research. And that became this research paper, which that was my experience my freshman year, my first year, okay? And this is my paper that I graduated with. So I had to do this to graduate. And so these two papers is my journey, you know, of like when I started questioning and learning about my identity, and my answer is that, you know, I have to be both. I can't choose. I shouldn't choose. To be Hmong or American, I have to find ways to be both, you know? And there may be times where I'm so frustrated that I hate being Hmong, and there may be times where I hate being American, but I have to find a way to love both and be both, you know? And today, on a day like this, I love being Hmong, you know, because I get to be here with all of you, and I get to dialogue about this. And then, right when I go home and start washing dishes, I get being Hmong again, you know? So it's this process, and it's never going to end. I'm just going to tell you, you know, for the young lady who's brave to share your experience, this push and pull is going to happen all the time. It's never going to end, even when you're 52. You know, you're still going to experience it. So find a way to get yourself out of that framework, okay, and teach people new things. Like I'm trying to teach you that it's okay to just live in both. You know, to complicate it and to be okay with, you know, this push and pull, or to create a third world, a space where you can balance it. Okay? So any other comments or anything? Because I think it's time to go. But thank you all so much for being here. I loved your questions. Email, feel free to email me, okay? For a lot of you college students, I'm so passionate about mentoring you to go to a PhD program or for anything, okay? Feel free, I'm your big sister, okay? Write to me, I will always respond back. This is correct, so yeah. So I will always respond back, okay? Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, so